Okay, so the meeting is now being recorded, just so everyone is aware. As you can see from the screen, we have quite a packed agenda today. There's a lot going on, so we're going to try to run through the updates as quickly as possible. I do want to allocate as much time as possible for one of the main pieces of the agenda today, which is Mark Person, who's going to be talking a lot about mental health in schools, showing some important data and statistics. Before we get started with that, there is just a couple of things that I want to state. Today's discussion will address general mental health and substance use. There's going to be an emphasis on drug overdose and or suicide. There was a trigger warning included in the agenda today. So just a note, because this will probably be fairly relevant for some of the folks actually in the schools working with these populations. So just practice self-care, practice awareness of where you're at, because these topics are real. I'm gonna stop talking at this point, and I'm gonna pass the mic over to Mark Person, who you all have met before. Mark, I think, has got some materials that he's going to be screen sharing out with us. So, Mark, without further ado, please jump on in and get us going.
All right, thanks, Brian. You guys can hear me okay, and looks like my monitor's set up okay. What I have is a few slides on a PowerPoint, so I'm gonna do a screen share here real quick. So give me just a moment. All right, Brian, can you let me know if you got the PowerPoint up okay?
I am seeing it loud and clear, sir. Thank you.
Make sure I got it. Brian, are those slides advancing for you guys on your side?
Yeah, right now I'm seeing the slide that says the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's got a bunch of directional signs towards stress, anger, tension, anxiety, nervousness, and worry.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's not advancing on here. All right, now do you see the first slide?
Yeah, there's the title slide.
Perfect. All right. Sorry, everybody. I think we're probably all starting to get used to the Zoom and teleconference challenges here. But again, my name's Mark Person. I'm a program manager for the Community Mental Health and Addictions Unit, which is a program within the health department. Just a quick note about our team and what we do. Primarily just taking a public health perspective to use in mental health in general. We apply all the same concepts through things like public health education, even epidemiology, data analysis and surveillance to provide data-informed decision-making, and a lot of community outreach, particularly in educational settings and working with healthcare systems and hospitals to address a lot of the growing concerns now of mental health and substance use. So some of this information that I'll be going over today will be related to some of the data that we collected here locally, and then some of it's really just general mental health information about recognizing signs and symptoms and self-care and I'll end with hopefully some important and useful resources for you guys to take with you as well. And just know, I know we have a limited amount of time, and this is a big, big topic. There's a lot more of this that I'd really like to cover. And I'm sure you guys have questions about it. So just know that this is an open invitation for me. I'll join if there are additional concerns or we have more information we wanted to cover later, we can't answer the questions. I'm always happy to come back. I think you guys have been meeting pretty regularly. So I'll just throw that out there at the beginning. So don't be too swayed if we run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this presentation. This is a PowerPoint that my teammates put together internally actually for the county to respond to a lot of the concerns of growing stress and mental health and a lot of the stuff we see in the media, and how do we address that internally. So this was originally geared at working with our internal county departments and any staffer that was interested in hearing more about self-care and stress management. But it also speaks to all the same concerns that you all, I think, will bring to the table. And I've adapted a few of these slides to include information specific to kids, and especially in the school system. So I'll go through that, and then I do have data too about local trends if there's interest in that. But I think the material itself is going to be probably the more significant piece. So to start out with, here's our objectives. Really, none of this stuff is new. All these concerns existed prior to the pandemic, but what we want to talk about now is why it's even more important for everyone to practice self-care and be aware of the impact, because what the pandemic has done is just exacerbated a lot of the already existing risk factors for mental health and substance use. And much like the coronavirus, no one is immune to mental health. So I think to start with, just when we go through this, don't think about this in terms of mental health applying to somebody that has a significant impairment or a disorder or a disability, and kind of applying it to the person that's in crisis. We need to think about this for everybody, because the bigger picture here is simultaneously what the pandemic has done, especially in the educational system, has added a lot of stress and challenges to the leaders. So our teachers and administrators, principals, superintendents have been met with enormous challenges, which really makes it difficult just on that part alone. But then you guys are also the leaders, the people that our kids and families look up to, and they're also struggling. And then along that with the families, parents and guardians as well, and all the challenges with scheduling and work. The stress levels have been, no doubt, increased across the board. And when everybody is tapped out like that, it makes the impact and the likelihood of more of us having mental health issues that need to be addressed, that can't just be, kind of walked off at home, or I'll just give it a day or two. The chances of somebody experiencing real mental health needs is very real. It always has been. But if there's one takeaway today, that's what I want it to be, is that everybody practices the same self-care and support for each other, for whether it's a child, a family, a teacher, an administrator. Think about everybody that's part of this picture. And really what we want to do, like this says here, is we want to talk about how do we build resilience and coping skills, and what are the resources that we can use locally to help navigate some of this stuff. And you guys already saw the signpost here, but this is a lot. I think this is a good representation. I kept this in because really all of these buzzwords here, I think, define in one way or another what everybody is experiencing. And some people maybe more forms of anger, anxiety, nervousness. We all express things a little bit differently. So the point I think here is just that stress induces all of these things, but it's different for the individual. So here's a little bit of updated, refreshed information following the pandemic. There's a lot of questions about it, a lot of stuff you see in the media. a lot of appropriate assumptions really about what the conditions are mean for our mental health. But here's some recent survey results that I think tell a pretty clear picture. And you can see there that 40% of Americans now report symptoms of anxiety, depression, and PTSD-like symptoms, or have turned to substance use or addiction, and in some cases, worst case scenarios, suicidal thoughts or overdoses. And that's why these things are really important, because they start small and quickly can lead up to that worst case scenario or that poor health outcome that we don't want to see, which is the development of long-term substance use disorder or an overdose, or suicidal thoughts, those kind of things. So the rates, obviously, you can see here on this are higher, especially for those between the ages of 18 and 44, at least according to the survey results, and especially those between 18 and 24. I could give you a lot of assumptions as to why those age groups have been hit hard. But that's what they would be, as assumptions, because again, these are survey results. This isn't any kind of a product of multiple clinical screenings that displayed clinical depression or anxiety. But in general, that age group, 18 to 24, that's a transitional period. A lot of people either graduating high school or entering college, or graduating college, trying to enter the workforce. Those things are major stresses right now for those particular age groups. So it definitely makes sense. But again, it really doesn't matter what age group we're talking about here. There's elevated stress with everybody. But again, the higher rates in the populations that are sometimes at higher risk also beyond age are people that are in essential worker positions. So that's just something obviously that's new to this year. So people that have been working throughout the duration of the pandemic, with little break, they have exceptional challenges beyond even what some others might, especially if they have families. So that's another one. People with kids, especially school-age kids, or people that already had a pre-existing mental health diagnosis or substance use diagnosis. Those are all factors that we have to look out for. And anybody in any kind of caregiving setting is going to have some unique stress at this period of time, which includes educators, teachers, colleges, elementary, middle schools, any kind of caregiving setting. And I think that's an important piece to point out here. So let me get into this real quick. This diagram here on the right, I know it's a little cartoonish, but it actually it gives you kind of a complete picture of what we're talking about, and the concerns that people have is emotions are normal in everybody. That's, everyone has bad days. Some people have really bad days. It doesn't always mean that that's an indicator of the presence of a mental illness or some kind of crisis. It always means, though, somebody needs support and additional kind of nurturing in that period of time to help them through, which is what I think instinctually we do, especially as parents or educators. But when do those things turn to the point where we have concern beyond just it's normal worry, normal stress, normal kind of anxiety? That's the piece I think that a lot of people have questions about. And when do I need to get help? Where do I get help? How do I do it? And how do I help somebody else get help? So those are the kind of things I hope to get to here. In general, again, this is really kind of right down to the nitty gritty, the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. When does normal sadness, stress, and worry become something that needs additional support? I don't want anybody to get caught up in when does it meet some kind of clinical criteria, or when should I call, a provider to try to get them enrolled in services, and am I going to do the wrong thing? Is there a screening that needs to happen? I think you guys and the work that you do already are pretty familiar with this stuff. So I think this will probably resonate quite a bit. But anytime an emotion or a change, a child or an adult or somebody on your staff, anytime it causes some kind of impairment in their day-to-day routines, That is the first indicator that somebody needs help. It is not an indicator that somebody is in a full-blown crisis and it's time to panic and hit the alarm buttons. It's just an indicator that they need help, they need support, they need somebody to talk to them, and from there we can work it out. The best thing to do is start the conversation and identify it. The worst thing to do is nothing and ignore it or pretend like it might go away later. Because this first bullet point is a good one. The difference between normal worry, normal stress, normal sadness, when it becomes a concern, is that it doesn't go away. Even in the presence of a traumatic event like a loss of a friend or a parent or loved one, there's a normal grieving process that we go through, and it takes a lot of support and sometimes clinical support for people to get through grieving periods like that. But if it goes on for a long period of time and doesn't get better over time, that's where we start to worry. And think of it the same way as you do. Again, I'll just keep going back to the pandemic. If you get a virus, a lot of times, what's the one thing that you're told when you need to get help and when you should talk to your doctor? When it gets worse, it doesn't get better. It's been a longer period of time, and regardless of the symptoms, you need to go in and get some help and talk to somebody. It's the same thing with mental health and substance use. So, other things that get disrupted are, anything that you would otherwise routinely enjoy doing, whether it's reading or sports or, watching basketball, art, hobbies. When those things start to be disrupted and you notice that somebody's not doing them or doesn't want to engage in them, or they don't get the same joy and kind of enthusiastic about those things, that's another indicator that something needs to be addressed. And then you've got your physical symptoms here that are pretty common. So fatigue, disrupted sleep patterns, either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. Appetite, the same thing, eating poorly or not eating enough. And then when we get into here, some feelings of worthlessness, and that usually comes from, it's the same thing every day, the same routine. I get up, I feel the same amount of worry or stress or anxiety or depression, and it doesn't go away, and it looks like it's this doom and gloom. There's no way out. And I don't feel the joy. I don't want to do anything that I used to do, because what's the point anymore? And that's where the worthlessness and the hopelessness comes in. Kind of start a burden to the people around you. Those things are, when that's present, that's escalating the concerns. And especially in the school setting, difficulty concentrating is another one. When you're constantly preoccupied by worrying about something or being sad about something or stressed about something and overwhelmed, you can't concentrate on anything else around you. So it's impossible to focus on reading or focusing in the classroom, kind of drifting off. And these would be significant if this is a child or a parent or a staffer or a friend that didn't previously suffered from those kind of things, and suddenly now they are. That's the big piece to highlight. And then obviously suicidal thoughts and tendencies toward turning to substance use, things like that, are at the extreme end. This is sort of, when do we hit that panic button to get help? And I don't like, panic button is the wrong word to use there, but when do we need to step in with a little bit more urgency to make sure that somebody gets help? And that, I think for me, in my experience, especially with kids and families and young adults, when all of those things together, if you have somebody that is suddenly there's some kind of situation or environmental change that's kind of disrupted their day and added stress, whether that's loss of a loved one, or the pandemic is a really good example that applies to everybody. A change in their routine. You've got that environmental change, then paired with a sudden change in their behaviors after a short period of time or a long period of time. And then that decreased performance and the physical symptoms, all those things together for an extended duration, even if it's, a week or 2 weeks, That's when it's time to do something a little bit more urgently, where we can't just continue to say, well, I've given them the resources, I've encouraged them, we try to work with them, we've developed plans, but it doesn't work. So, we've kind of done all we can do. At that point, really, there needs to be some involvement of, if you have a counselor or a clinical psychologist, school psychologist, or if you have external behavioral health agencies that provide some support in your school, that's when it's time to definitely involve them um, pretty quickly. And obviously, if there's any question of a child's safety or an immediate health jeopardy, you think that they may be hurt at home, or they may hurt themselves, or they're just spiraling out of control with these, just not eating, not sleeping, coming lethargic. If those kind of things are present, that's different. I mean, and that's where I know you guys engage in procedures. Typically, that's going to be a 911 call. Sometimes it involves, DCS for additional support in the home, all those things. And I think you guys are probably pretty well versed in that already. But that's kind of how these things escalate from a behavioral health perspective. And then you have here at the bottom too, being socially withdrawn and isolated. Some people, there's a difference between just kind of being an introvert and socially withdrawn, and just not engaging socially at all, even when you have class projects or out on the playgrounds or social circles. If somebody is just quickly withdrawing from those situations, even if it's somebody that typically kind of did that before, if they're always on their own, and sort of just not engaging, that's definitely another cue. Okay, so that piece of it was just sort of the general introduction to what I think are the ones to talk about in a short session like this. Now I just want to shift into applying it to children and teens so that we can, kind of use some real, examples that may spark some ideas for you guys and some questions and dialogue. But here's a similar survey that I showed you in the beginning for adults. This is one that was done for teens. I'll just kind of pause with this up here. You can see the infographic for yourself about where the percentages are, and how that's kind of changed a little bit with the introduction of the pandemic. This survey was done a little while ago, so it's likely those results have changed. I know they'll do more surveys like this, and you'll probably see some refreshed areas, but this is, I think, was a month or two ago that this was done, maybe even over the summer. But still, it kind of tells the story for you. And we'll make these things available to you, so don't feel like if I move on from this too quickly, that it's going to go away. Okay. So again, recognizing the signs and symptoms is a key piece of this. And it's a little bit different, though, for youth than some of the things we talked about before. The same concept, but it just, stress and anxiety and depression presents itself a little bit different in kids, especially young kids that aren't, through all the developmental stages. They don't know what they're experiencing. They don't know how to express it. And it just sort of happens, and it's this foreign feeling to them. So, things like excessive crying, particularly if you're talking about people in elementary school. This could be also all the way up to middle school and high school, but probably more applicable to our youngsters. A sudden change in academic performance. I know you guys are already well versed in this, but if that's the difference between somebody who had struggles going in and may have a learning disability or a mental health issue that kind of gets in the way of their learning, you're looking for that sudden change again. So a kid with ADHD or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, there's a lot of barriers that presents in the classroom. And you may have been working with these kids before, but if it's already been established and you're on a plan with them and they're doing pretty well, and then all of a sudden it changes again and it gets worse, That's where I think academic performance can be reevaluated, and you think, well, okay, maybe something is getting a little bit worse. This isn't a typical day for this kid. And then in the absence of somebody that has an actual diagnosis, a sudden change in academic performance is an indicator of increased stressors and some struggling due to either environmental triggers or just the exposure to some of the negative trends and storylines in the media. A lot of stuff that people are exposed to now that kind of comes out as doom and gloom. Or again, this is more applicable to youngsters, but returning to behaviors that they had previously outgrown. So that could be, accidents at school or accidents at home, bedwetting, that kind of thing. Or some of the maybe nervous behaviors I've had before that have been exacerbated with some kind of skin picking or excessive worry or trying to avoid specific areas or people. If it's somebody that's a little socially anxious, maybe they have their group of friends, but now all of a sudden they're returning to isolating a little bit more. There's a lot of different ways that that could surface. And then excessive worry and sadness. If you have it's normal, again, to worry about being behind in school or kind of keeping up with your schedule or missing appointments, stuff like that. But if somebody becomes completely preoccupied by, oh my God, I've got to get my work turned in, I got to get logged into my online class, I've got to get all this stuff done. What if I miss this? What if the school closes? All these things that are on everyone's minds right now. When that becomes excessive to the point where they can't move on from it and they're falling behind in their work or not doing anything because of just the sheer volume of worry, that's definitely a big indicator that somebody needs some additional support. Again, unhealthy eating and sleeping habits is another one that applies across the board. Anybody that's human, that's impacted by stress, is gonna one of the first things that it hits is your sleeping habits and your appetite. And then irritability or acting out. This one's important for me anytime I do these talks, especially in schools, because a lot of times this is misinterpreted. Not always, but a lot of kids that are really struggling, and this is if they do have an undiagnosed mental health condition or they're just developing a really high levels of stress in response to some of the changes in their environment. That's not typically something that kids at that age are equipped to deal with. They don't know how to deal with it. And sometimes it surfaces in really ugly ways, really. They can get mean, irritable, act out, start, using profanity or just doing things that, in their mind are, I'm just done with this. Nobody gets me. I'm struggling. I explain it. They don't understand it, and they get frustrated in their mind. And so any little question that comes up, they respond with irritability, or just start not caring anymore. That kind of thing. Even in really young kids and elementary age kids, that's going to be a common response to something that's bothering them. The unfortunate part about it is it tends to push people away rather than a cue that they need support. It has a tendency to put a wedge between the child and the parent who's trying to maintain some accountability and appropriate behaviors, and the child and the school if they're getting in trouble. And this is where things kind of get complicated because we do need to hold people accountable. But when a kid goes home and they run into a dead end there, and then they're at school and they're a dead end there, and then the next thing is their social circle where they usually rely on things. If they've started to irritate their friends and their friends are now avoiding them, and then they run into another obstacle there, then we've had somebody that's just completely and totally isolated, and that's where things can get pretty challenging, and particularly it can escalate pretty quickly. And then we've covered this one, I think, enough. Avoidance of activities that they enjoyed in the past. Some of this stuff takes knowing kids and their families really well. So you have to kind of know, maybe this is something that's later into the school year where you've come to get to know some of these kids a little bit better. But any of the activities or things that they did that suddenly change or they stop doing, and I'm not talking about like a fad where all of a sudden I really liked this cartoon or some kind of clothing or a hobby, and then all of a sudden it's not doing it anymore. Those are normal kid things, but if there's something that a child is really good at it and passionate about it, that's kind of, and there's a big change in it, that's where the concern gets a little bit greater. And then lastly, this is an important one, especially again for youngsters that don't know how to explain themselves. There's going to be a lot of complaints of I have a headache, my leg hurts, my arm hurts, and it's just repetitive reporting of it. In the absence of any real concern. If they just, if they're not sick and they don't have any kind of injury, but they keep saying these kind of things, oh my God, my stomach hurts. That's a lot of time sort of their unspoken way of expressing that they're not doing well. And sometimes their head does hurt and their stomach does hurt. They just don't know what it means. But again, anxiety particularly goes straight to your head and straight to your stomach, particularly when you've been worrying about things for long periods of time. They don't know how to understand that the worrying and the anxiety that I'm going through is causing my stomach to hurt or my head to hurt. And what I'm seeing now, which is an even bigger challenge, especially for this group, is those things are expressed in the school place in the pandemic era. There's some major challenges that come into play, and these are the things that keep me up at night, because they're going to report these things, and then there's a real complex response now because of the extreme caution that we're under for the pandemic, and the potential for kids and families to stop reporting these things and being a little bit more private about their home life and what's going on, with the pediatrician and those kind of things, because there could be potential consequences that come with it, although they're not meant to be consequences. There's a lot of worry about, people being out of work or out of school and all the challenges that come with that. So I know that this group has talked about that a lot, but those physical symptoms do come into play when there's a lot of stress involved. So that's I think an important one just to mention here. Okay, and then this one kind of got mixed into the bottom here. Use of alcohol, tobacco, or drugs. This is no surprise, and it's nothing new. Those three things have been a common coping mechanism for people for decades. Still is, and it's become a little bit worse in the pandemic era. So the presence of substance use, whether it's new or existing and getting worse, those kind of things are also things to look out for, even for young kids. Really unusual for somebody under the age of 10, not impossible, obviously, but pretty unusual. But it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility for kids 12 and up. We have had lots of confirmed overdoses. When I say lots, we have had confirmed overdoses in kids in that age group between 12 and 18. It happens, and I know that people on this call, this meeting, are familiar with some of these stories too. So please don't think that young kids are immune to this either. But usually, if it's elementary age kids, if there is some kind of exposure, it's usually going to be alcohol or tobacco. And sometimes young kids have accidental exposure to narcotics that are in the home. It's not usually related to stress and trying to, set up a coping mechanism and going out and using. It's usually just something was in the home and not stored safely, or shouldn't have been in the home to begin with. And a child got a hold of it. So what can we do about it? I think, I'm running low on time, but resilience is the key to this whole thing. And I want you to think about resilience as in the same way that you do an immune system. It is important to every living human being. If we don't have resiliency, we're much more susceptible to stressful situations becoming worse and worse. But if we have some good positive protective factors in place, and we have a healthy mindset about us, and we have that resiliency developed, we can fend off a lot of these things fairly easily. And that's why you see some people encounter the same situation and it devastates one person and another person becomes stronger from it. It's just kind of the way of human life. It's the same thing again with the coronavirus. Some people that encounter it have a really strong reaction to it, and others are just fine. You don't see any, they're the normal road to recovery. So think about it that way, just to kind of ingrain it in your minds that way. Because resilience, not just in the classroom or in the school place, as a community, and particularly right now with the pandemic and a lot of the social disruption that's out there. This is an election year. A lot of the stories in the media about racial discrimination, that social unrest. There's a lot of stuff happening out there, but resiliency as a community is critical. And the reason that I say that is because it's one of those things that if we can, as a group, either in a school setting or at home as a family unit or as an entire community, if we can build more of that resilience, it affects everybody around us, and it makes overcoming some of these challenges a lot easier. So that kind of that social psychology that's part of it as well. We just see the negative all the time in the media, kind of starts to bring everybody down and apart. But if we can find ways to lead by example and through positive interactions and emphasize more inspiration, that stuff becomes infectious, and the good stuff starts to spread then. So really, when I look at that, kind of defining it, grief gets turned into growth. Somebody that I know for me personally and other people I've encountered that have been through significant traumatic events. They're traumatic, but in the end, they've turned that energy into something positive, and some of them have developed careers based on their experience, and they twist that around and turn a harmful interaction into something that they can grow from. And so, this is similar to the second bullet point. Those are typically people that look at that impossible situation and say, okay, bring it on. I'm going to welcome this challenge. And it's just going to be a sweeter reward when I knock this thing out of the park later. That person, that mindset, that resiliency is what we're looking for. That's what we want to encourage and inspire in everyone, especially the people that don't just naturally have that instinct. So how do we do that? How can we nurture resilience? I think for the school setting, it's going to be, again, leading by example. I'm starting to speed through this because I'm sensing my time is running low. But it starts with you as a teacher, an administrator, a leader, us as parents. We have to be, anytime we're in front of children, we need to be leading with positive interactions and really, really overemphasize little success stories with kids and make sure it's done consistently and frequently, more so than ever. If you can find a way in your classrooms or online in the Zoom meetings to really reward kids for things, they're going to start looking forward to it, and they're going to start some of that stress level and those things that they see around them that are not normal, that are worrying them, will start to fade. When the people that are leaders are exemplifying these things, that's their kind of their beacon. That's their way to their guidance through the fog. Okay, if my dad and my mom and my teacher, I'm following them. I look at them, I see their mannerisms, I see what they say, and they're telling me good things a lot. I still get some bad stuff. I'm doing bad. They let me know about it, but overemphasizing the positive now is critical for kids. So I really encourage people to do as much of that as possible. You probably are already. I mean, you guys know more about this stuff than I do in the school setting, but I just know what that does for adults as well. So that's something you can practice within the teacher and the administrator group too. But be open-minded. These changes are, I know, rocking a lot of people's worlds. They've turned the educational system upside down for teachers, parents, and kids. And I think that open-mindedness is going to be a key factor in this. Being able to find new ways to address old problems, find new ways to reach out to the kids that need additional support, those kind of things that are so important right now. Encourage coping skills. You guys know your kids and their families, if they have good coping skills like arts, reading, sports, encourage those things every chance you get. Practice gratitude, obviously. That's also infectious. We want to do things that will slowly start to spread throughout the group, because it only takes 2 or 3 people that start to suffer, and then 4 and 5 and 6, and before you know it, a lot of the kids have started to kind of go downhill, and then teachers start to struggle with stress. You're not immune to it. Parents, and once that kind of expands and hits a lot of us, it becomes a lot harder to turn it around. And I'm going to keep going back to the comparison of the pandemic and the viral outbreak. If we get something early, it's easy to manage it. If it has already spread and reached a lot of people, it's going to take us twice the amount of resources to put it out. And not that we can't do it, and it's not hopeless, but doing this up front and really maintaining it through some kind of daily mindfulness that we all practice and encourage and teach. If any teachers out there are teaching mindfulness and know that concept, I would highly encourage doing that on a daily basis right now, every chance you get. And then offering support. Obviously, that we kids need to, even if they don't need it, kids need to know that we care and that we're asking questions and we're offering them support, especially the quiet ones. And then how to maintain that healthy immune system. It's a lot of the same stuff really to maintain your physical immune system. The more active you are physically, the more resilient you'll be. Physical activity is one of the best ways to extinguish anxiety, particularly, and stress and worry. Some rigorous physical activity will get rid of anxiety better than any medication in the moment. Not necessarily the case for depression, but physical activity is important for all forms of mental health, and just, again, maintaining that healthy mental immune system. Healthy eating, I think people really underestimate this, but especially here, being hydrated, eating the right foods is critical. Breathing exercises are important, especially for kids who start to worry and they see that rapid breathing. It kind of gets away from them if they can stop and practice throughout the day some routines of sort of just basic meditation. Those are really helpful. That's kind of this mindfulness and relaxation that you see here. Music and art is a great way to sort of just take the mind off of all of the daily routines and assignments and all that stuff, because it really gears the focus on one thing that's calming. And this one, I couldn't emphasize more, encouraging humor and laughing. Even when things are a little bit off or stressful, humor and smiling and laughing and kids being able to do that is really important. So if you're able to, again, if there's a teacher out there that used to maybe be one of the class clowns that's incorporated this kind of stuff in the classroom, I really encourage that. Anything even if it's 5 minutes of laughter, that makes all world of difference for kids. And I'm just going to jump through this now because I believe I'm probably over my time now because we're at about 45 minutes. But again, here's just basic info on getting support. And this last slide is a good listing of all of our local resources. There's information here about the Warm Line, our 24-hour community-wide crisis line for behavioral health related calls, anything related to domestic violence and sexual assault. We've got Emerge and SACASA to support the LGBTQ community, the crisis hotline here. And so we'll make all this stuff available, your suicide prevention hotline. These are really important resources. There's a lot more out there than this, but to get it all on one page, these are the big ones. And again, I'll leave this with you guys. I didn't have time to get into our local data, and I don't even think that today would have been a good day to go over all that. I think this information was the most pertinent. If there's interest after this in having me revisit and present some of our local trends and what we're actually seeing, so you know what's going on out there with kids, I will certainly do that. But let me just end with a statement that we are seeing significant concerns in mental health crisis in school-age kids. The overdose trends and the self-harming trends are concerning. We've had very young kids affected by self-harm and completed suicide, and we've had very young kids that have wound up in the hospital and luckily saved from an overdose, but we have also had multiple fatal overdoses in kids. So I know that kind of ends on a note that we don't want to talk about, but it's important, and everything that just took place before these statistics are why all those things are as important as they are, because we don't want that stuff to surge. We don't want it to increase. And if we can maintain it, we'll hopefully effectively decrease the likelihood of those crisis situations. So I'm going to end there, and if there's questions, you can fire them into the chat, or if Brian thinks we have time for me to take a few, please do, but I'm going to go ahead and stop here and kind of see where we're at.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate you taking time to present this today. So if you do have questions for Mark, just go ahead and drop those in the chat and just proceed them with a mark. And then Mark, if you can just kind of monitor the chat and just type in responses. And if you're comfortable sharing your contact information, folks can reach out to you that way. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of other things to cover on the rest of the agenda. I'm going to try to fly through these as quickly as possible. So if you have questions for Mark, drop them into the chat box. There's 2 PDF documents that I dropped into the chat box that you can download that are some of the strategies that Mark was referring to assist in some of that prevention. So just connect there if you can. And I will get to your question, Miss Miller Hilden. Just give me a minute to get through a couple of these other things, okay? We will try to share out those resources via email if they're not opening right now either. So thanks for calling that to our attention. So one of the things that I know is a big concern is the metrics and increased cases. So let's jump straight over to the schools dashboard for ADHS. This is updated November 5th. So you can see that we are on the rise as of right here. This is October 18th. We were up to 87 per 100K. Our percent positivity is at 5.5 right now. So a couple of things to remember with this, or to take into consideration with this. As a schools team, we have seen an increased number of cases reported from school sites. There are some concerns about that, but here's the most important thing that we've seen from our end. Our schools continue to implement really good mitigation techniques, and we're not seeing a lot of classroom transmission going on. The rates for that have been fairly low overall. I would say maybe 5 out of 50 cases that we get in, and that's just off the top of the head. We are actually charting out all this, and we'll have some more solid data for you all on a future call. But those 5 or so outbreaks are due to in-school, in-class transmission. And that's happened where, teachers are lowering their guard and having lunch together closer than 6 feet, not following mitigation. Most of the outbreaks that we're seeing happening at schools right now are due to either kids meeting up outside of schools, parties. We've had slumber parties. The meal times have been a really big one. And we've seen a lot of this happen with our athletics teams. So our football and cheer have been the highest rates of this. And this has been outside of the actual sports events. It's been at social gatherings. That's consistent with a report that we heard the other day from there was a Science Friday podcast, and they were citing information that showed that that funerals in Michigan were one of the highest spreaders for COVID. So those social gatherings where people kind of lower their guard and aren't wearing masks or aren't practicing appropriate social distancing, aren't washing their hands frequently, that's where we're seeing transmission of COVID at the highest rates. So, just kind of keep that in mind. And for that reason, we as a health department are saying that we are going to go ahead and move forward with a hybrid instructional model, that schools can continue with that. Even if we see the cases per 100,000 shoot up past 100, we will continue to issue the guidance that hybrid education is still okay. And again, that's because you all as schools have been implementing really good mitigation overall. 95% of the schools that we've worked with are doing social distancing within classrooms. Everyone's mandating masks. There's increased washing, both of hands and frequently touched surfaces, going on throughout all our schools. So, that to us is enough of a proactive measure where we feel like it's important for our kids to be socially engaged for all the reasons that Mark just presented on. So it's really important to note those pieces, okay? I'm going to jump over to the Pima County metrics. And again, we're flying through these. I would like to spend a little bit more time on these, but these are the cases from October 31st through October 17th. You're probably going to see an escalation on the 23rd and up here on a couple of these cases, as that data tends to roll in from the state on a 2-week backlog. So you'll see October 24th jump up a little bit. The 27th all the way through the 31st, you'll see those numbers go up over the next couple of weeks. This is the data dashboard that the county puts out for free public use. This is the overall interface. You can pull down and again, pull out by zip code, go down and look by school district. Right now, we've been looking at cases by date and popping that window out and then sliding this over to get a more accurate picture of what's going on within those specific date ranges, okay? So just to show you where that information is coming from. And that information is directly downloaded by the state. You'll see an update probably in this disease data over the next couple days. Thursday is the typical day that we update this, which is today. So by noon today, you might see percent positivity drop down here. We're not really sure yet, though. We're still waiting to kind of assess some of that data on the back end. You can see that we did drop back into red for timely case investigation. And this is one of the points that I want to go back and just look at the agenda here for a moment on closing the loop on contact tracing and case investigation. Okay. So what we, again, we're doing a call out to our schools. One of the challenges has been following up on quarantine and isolation and the dates that are issued for students who have been close contact, who have been identified as a positive case. Our previous recommendation was a kind of a cumulative looping isolation to quarantine, which means that if a household contact is a positive case, there's 10 days of isolation. The quarantine for the siblings in that household did not start until 10 days after that isolation had, or after the isolation had been completed. Okay, then you start the 14 days of quarantine. That guidance is no longer, that is not the guidance that we are issuing at this point. And we are trying to get this graphically made up. It's difficult because all of this guidance is going to be on a case-by-case basis. Our contact tracers and case investigators will ultimately have the final say on when quarantine and isolation will cease for any close contact or any positive identified case. So here's the best way to close that loop that we have right now. That's for you as the point of contacts at school sites to ask your parents when you have conversations, the parents and guardians, when you have conversations with them, to ask them to ask contact tracers and case investigators for documentation on when quarantine and isolation will end. They can get that via text message, or they can get that via email, and then they can pass that on to the school. That is not the ideal process. That's not ultimately what we'd like to end on, but that is the only way we can make this work at this point in time. Maximus, which are contact tracers, case investigators, do contact tracing for the entire county, and we can't get them to implement a process in a timely fashion that would solve this issue of closing the loop on contact tracing case investigation. It would take them a solid month and a half to completely reformat our process so that only schools flagged cases would get this additional technical assistance. So again, the ask is that when you talk to the parents, if you're wondering about quarantine and isolation ending, ask the parents to ask their contact tracers, case investigators for documentation, either email or text, on the end date of their quarantine or isolation when they can return to your facility. Okay. One other quick thing I'm going to jump onto here. There's a link in the agenda that is isolation space guidance. I'm going to have to do this a different way. So give me a second here, navigate back over here. This is from the National Nurses Association, or National Association of School Nurses. Right here, they give some more detailed information on isolation rooms, quarantine rooms within a school setting. So you'll have that link within the agenda that you received. Go ahead and open that up. I'm going to go ahead and post that in the thread as well here, just so everyone has that. You can access that. A couple questions popping up in the chat box. And yes, Laura, that is correct. The 10 plus 14 day is no longer in effect. That is not our guidance. The guidance will default towards contact tracers, case investigators, okay? So whatever the quarantine end date or isolation end date is for the positive case or the close contacts, that date will come from our contact tracers and case investigators. And we don't have a standard measure for that. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. There may be a couple of cases where you've got 24 hours. There may be a couple where you've got 10 days. Or not 24 hours, 24 days. Some will be 10, some will be 14, some may be 16. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Again, I recognize how much chaos and craziness this is going to cause. I wish we could fix this differently, but this is the only strategy we have at this point in time.
Brian, this is Kathy. Can I interrupt because I can't get into chat? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead really quick, Kathy.
And I'm sorry. Can we just assume then that to start out, if we have a positive household contact, the pending hearing from the contact tracer, we should put them out for the minimum of 14 days and then adjust that once we have further information?
That would be a good strategy to use, I think. I think that would be a good strategy to use for sure. And I do see Sherry's question in the chat here. Absolutely, you can use that 10 plus 14 until parents submit documentation as well. That would be just fine. So yeah, Kathy, excellent point. As a key, so in the meantime, this is just again to close the loop on the contact tracing case investigation, because what was happening is we were getting, I can't tell you how many cases we got in the last week. It was a lot. The close contacts were even more, and it's impossible for my team of 3 to 4 people to follow up on all of those and get the specific quarantine isolation guidance out to you all. It would take us a month just to do one day of that. It's an impossible ask. So the best thing that we can do for right now is to have you ask the parents and or guardians to get that documentation from the contact tracers and case investigators when the health department calls them to issue that guidance. Okay. There's 2 other things I just need to cover on the agenda really quick. Sports and cheer. Next week, we have another meeting with coaches and athletic directors. On Thursday, we will be issuing the updated guidance on the mitigation plans for winter sports, which will include basketball and a couple of others. We'll have some very specific guidance around cheer and spirit line. We are seeing a lot of cases within that specific social demographic. So just if you have any say with your cheer, encourage those folks to not gather socially outside of school because we are seeing a lot of cases with that specific area. Again, a reiterance that close contacts are cumulative over 24 hours. That's 15 minutes cumulative over a 24-hour period. I talked a little bit about outbreaks in schools. We are developing some more information on this, and we should have some better data for you all in the next week or two. So just know that that's coming down the pipeline, okay? At this point, I'm going to turn to questions in the chat as well as hands raised. So I know Ms. Miller-Hilden, you've been waiting patiently. Thank you. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Okay. If you're able to do so, please post in the chat, Ms. Miller-Hilden. Ms. Cernacki, I see that you've got your hand up, and again, you've been patiently waiting, so go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask the same question as the last person, but would it be more prudent to say for a household case that they're out for 24 days unless you provide written proof of otherwise, or would it be better to do the 14 days? I'm just thinking if we say 14 days and the contact tracer says 24, they're not going to tell us that.
Yeah, so I think that that's going to be a district by district decision. If we had a stronger stance on this at the state level, I would be very comfortable in saying do 24, but we don't, unfortunately. We're in a space where our guidance is that local jurisdictions will decide the rules. The health department would recommend 24 days unless they can provide documentation of otherwise. But your district may disagree with that. So turn to your districts individually for guidance around that specific question. I hope that, again, I wish I could give you something stronger, Ms. Cernacki. I do, but that's where we're at. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, I'm going to stop recording at this point. I know we're over time and we've all got a lot going on today. Mark, again, thank you